So I would like to welcome everyone and thank you for joining us today for the technical feedback from iSWM Adaptor's webinar. My name is Sydney Liggins, and I am a planner for the iSWM Implementation Subcommittee, along with Carolyn Horner, who is a senior planner with the COG as well. Our presentation will be given by Ashley Lowry, as well as Ben Pilement with HAF. Next slide, please. To give you all a little bit of background about why we are doing this, this webinar is part of the technical meetings with iSWM Adaptors task, which is set by the iSWM Implementation Subcommittee. As part of this task, a series of online surveys was sent out to the iSWM adopters so that they could provide feedback on their challenges and problems that they experienced under the iSWM program. Our goal of these surveys was to receive this feedback in regards to the criteria manual, technical manuals, and supporting documents as well as training. After receiving this feedback, HAF has developed potential solutions to the issues expressed, and these solutions will be shared during this webinar. The final feedback will be summarized in a memorandum, which will be then given to the iSWM subcommittee, and this feedback will consist of corrections, methodology, missing information, and clarifications. Next slide, please. So for those of you who would like to review the manuals that will or have been discussed after this presentation, we have linked those at the top of the page here. We have a lot of material to cover, and we ask that you hold all questions until the end. We will have all of our participants on mute, but if you would like to submit a question during the presentation, please use the chat feature by clicking the chat bubble as shown in step 1, and this will open the dialog box as shown in step 2. Next slide, please. So during this webinar, we will cover the summary of the online survey results, address the feedback we received in regards to the construction controls technical manual, the hydrology and hydraulics technical manual, iSWM implementation and enforcement, as well as site development controls technical manual. And then we'll wrap it all up with questions and next steps. So now I'm going to mute myself and turn it over to Ashley.
Thanks, Sydney. Okay, so as Sydney mentioned, this is all a part of a task under the iSWM Implementation Subcommittee. And so in order to get this task started, a survey was sent out. And I'm going to discuss that at a high level before getting into the specific technical comments that was received. So the survey was sent out at the beginning of December, and participants had until the end of January to respond. The survey went out to those who have adopted the iSWM program to get an idea of the things that are working for these communities and what hasn't been working. Unfortunately, the number of responses to the survey was on the low end with 5 respondents. This survey was also gave those iSWM communities an opportunity to provide open-ended technical feedback, which will be covered for the bulk of the presentation today. But before getting into the specific technical comments, I'm going to briefly go over the responses of the general questions that were asked in this survey. So the first question was to check all components of iSWM that the staff of that community uses. The most utilized component was the criteria manual, and by extension, the technical manuals. And it appears the respondents use the iSWM criteria manual with local changes, mainly. So the second question is, where do you see the greatest need for training and clarify it in order to clarify iSWM requirements? And the most said the greatest need was developers and designers. What was the greatest challenges implementing or enforcing iSWM? Or have they had challenges, I'm sorry, implementing or enforcing iSWM? And the results were mixed. But both saying that no, they have not had challenges. And then the next question was asking how concerned their community is with downstream impacts, including water quality and erosion. And the most common response was somewhat high, on a range of very high to very low. And then the last general question was asking if iSWM has helped the community achieve their goals. And the 4 that responded said yes. Okay, so now we're going to get into the specific technical questions that were submitted as a part of the survey. For each of the comments we talk about today, I'm going to state that the comment was brought to our attention. I'm going to state what the comment was that was brought to our attention and the recommendation to hopefully appropriately address that comment. These recommendations do not mean that the iSWM technical manuals will be modified at this time, but it is what will be recommended to the iSWM implementation subcommittee, and it will be up to COG and the subcommittee to determine if the recommendations are implemented. During the Q&A time, you'll have a chance to ask questions or comments, as Sydney said. So, so please submit those questions or comments through the chat as we go along, and we'll try to address them all at the end. And even if we run out of time, which I don't think we will, we'll take those comments into considerations for the final recommendations. The first round of technical comments that we're going to go through is all about the construction controls technical manual. All right, so diving in. The first comment is about, well, I will say all 4 comments about the construction controls technical manual was about section 3.9, sediment basin design. The first comment was that there was inconsistent drawdown time requirement. And if you've been at the iSWM implementation subcommittee meetings, you might have heard them discuss this comment. But the issue was that on pages 115 and 118, it states that the required drawdown time is 36 hours. However, in the design procedures, it states that to use 6 hours in the calculations. So this issue does require a change to the technical manual, and so we recommend that a consistent drawdown time of 36 hours is utilized. So that would require wording to be updated on page 135 in the procedures, and changing that from 6 hours to 36 hours. All right, and so continuing on comments regarding sediment basin design. So wording, it was when I got on the phone. It was my doctor. You're like, okay. Sorry, I just wanted to mute. So the next comment was to include wording for the orifice outlet of a sediment basin, that it should be no less than 3 inches to prevent 3 inches in diameter to prevent clogging issues. So the recommendation for this is that an update doesn't need to be added to the manual, because on page 135, it states that the diameter of the dewatering orifice should never be less than 3 inches in order to prevent clogging by soil or debris. And so this wording may have been added after this comment was received, but I would need COG to confirm that, since obviously I didn't make the specific change. All right, moving right along. Okay, so also within the sediment and basin design procedures, specifically in step 1, the comment was to correct or add a reference to the hydrology technical manual for required volume calculations. And so to address this comment, we do recommend making a modification to the manual. This section in the construction controls currently refers to section 3.8 in the criteria manual, which is for selecting which stormwater control is appropriate for your site. And so it could potentially be assumed if someone reading this section, the sediment basin section of the manual, that they have already selected their stormwater control being the sediment basin. And so we would recommend removing that reference to the criteria manual section 3.8 and adding a reference to section 1.0 of the hydrology technical manual, and specifically maybe table 1.1, which gives guidance on which hydrologic method is appropriate for the site, and then also directs them to the corresponding section for that methodology. And we'll get more into hydrology methods and comments regarding that here in a little bit. And so also related to that first comment was, you can see on the second bullet that the question was, where did equation 3.2 come from? And so you can see I did a screenshot and the overview of that equation in the blue box. So this equation is an approximate method used to estimate the volume of a proposed basin based off of dimensions already determined. And so, and this is a formula used that assumes a bowl-shaped basin. And so approximately, and so that's where the 0.4 comes from. But this equation is not used to determine the required volume, but it can be used to ensure that the proposed basin parameters meets the detention requirements. And so that's why it's there in the technical manual. But adding the reference I discussed previously will help clear up someone looking at the manual how they can determine the required volume. Because that equation 3.2, that's not what it's used for. All right, moving on. Continuing on with sediment basin, got 2 more comments. One more comment. The last comment was that the manual needs a better explanation of surface skimmers. And that comment was to hopefully encourage the use of them. And they suggested highlighting that surface skimmers can be reusable. And in relation to that, a recommendation to remove a perforated riser and the diagram for that was suggested. And so you can see the diagram for both of these, the surface skimmer and the perforated riser on the right. And so the goal of the sediment basin is to capture the muddy water and allow the sediment to settle. And the surface skimmer is more efficient because it works from the top down, releasing the cleanest water near the surface, as you can see in the diagrams. For a recommendation, we do recommend adding wording to section 3.9.3 that surface skimmers can be reusable. However, we don't recommend removing the perforated riser diagram. There is a caveat in the manual on page 118 that a perforated riser can be used when surface discharge or surface skimmer is not feasible, and it warns that it is has the lowest sediment removal efficiency. I guess a recommendation could be made to make that language more strong, but we don't recommend removing the perforated riser diagram at this time. All right, so that was the construction controls technical manual comments, and we're going to move on to feedback that was received about the hydrology and hydraulic technical manuals. Hopefully I'm not going too fast. All right, so the first comment is a pretty straightforward one. In the hydraulic technical manual, section 2.1.3, there was an error found in the formula for a frustrum of a pyramid. And so currently that equation includes an extra division by 3, and that is incorrect. And so the recommendation would be to obviously update that equation. So on page 94 in the hydraulic manual. So thank you to whoever caught that error. All right. So the next comment was that the hydraulic technical manual doesn't include a calculation for an on-grade inlet along a parabolic crown street. And so currently the hydraulic, the iSWM manual uses HEC 12, FHWA, or Federal Highway Administration, I believe it stands for, yes. And for the inlet calculations, it refers to HEC 12. So this comment, we do recommend making a modification to the manual. And we would recommend adding a reference to the most recent version of the Federal Highway Administration's manual, HEC 22. This does provide calculations for this type of inlet and road cross-section. And so, whoever made this comment, if I put a link to that document, and you can see some screenshots of the information found in the document, but it does walk you through that calculation in section B.3. Okay. Getting back to hydrology and detention sizing. And so focusing on the hydrology technical manual. The first comment was that a more concise section should be added to the technical manual for detention sizing. And so there are several hydrologic methodologies included in the technical manual. And there are several options that can be used for detention design, and it depends on the specifics of the site, obviously. And this, and related to this comment, it was followed by a question regarding the modified rational method for detention design. Is it okay to use for any design? Is it okay to use the modified rational method for any detention design, or just preliminary design and approximation? So the recommendation for that. So for this, and to address this comment, we recommend no update to the technical manual. In section 1.0 of the hydrology manual, table 1.1 states what hydrology methodologies can be used for storage facilities design. In table 1.2 determines the limits of those methodologies. And so you can see table 1.1 in the screenshot. And so SCS method, modified rational, Snyder's unit hydrograph, and water quality volume calculation. And so the technical manual states that the modified rational method can be used for storage facility design for drainage areas of 200 acres or less. And I thought in order to address this comment, it was worth mentioning on page 7 that it states the normal use of the modified rational method significantly underpredicts detention volumes, but the improved method in section 1.5 corrects this deficiency, and the method can be used for detention design for drainage areas of 200 acres or less, of up to 200 acres. And so, so I know there's lots of different pieces in the technical manuals to address the detention sizing, but reorganizing the sections for detention design throughout the hydrology and the hydraulic manuals is out of the scope of this task at this time. If deemed necessary, it could be addressed if COG did a formal review of the criteria manual and technical manuals, but that's not what is occurring at this time. As stated, you know, we're addressing technical comments of fixing issues and clarifications throughout the iSWM program. So moving on. So this next comment is probably a known issue to most H&H engineers out there, but so related to the previous comment, this comment points out that the SCS unit hydrograph method peak flows seem very large compared to the rational method. And like I said, I think several H&H engineers can confirm that fact. But for this comment, we also don't recommend an update to this manual. The SCS unit hydrograph method is known for being a conservative approach, but it is used widely throughout the Metroplex in the state. And so coming up with an alternative methodology is probably outside the scope of this task, but I might recommend that this could potentially be brought up during the roundtable discussion at an iSWM implementation subcommittee meeting to initiate discussion and get others input on this. If other people have come up for a solution to this or an alternative, but no recommendations for changes to the technical manual is recommended for this comment. All right. So I think this is the last comment for the hydrology and hydrology technical manuals. So, and it's another methodology question. So in section 1.3.7, the simplified SCS peak runoff section, the issue was the method as described is not a complete method. Prefer to have a note referring to TR for the full description and suggest to remove this section. So so we would recommend an update to the manual to add a note or a caveat that the full description in compliance with the methodology, please refer to the TR55 document, excuse me. At this time, we wouldn't recommend removing the formulas that are in there as long as there is a caveat for full methodology. Refer to that document to ensure that they're following and are in full compliance. As far as where it is applicable, the manual does state that these procedures are applicable to small drainage areas less than 2,000 acres with homogeneous land uses and can be described with a single curve number. So on to the third section, which is iSWM implementation and enforcement. There was a couple comments regarding this. So a clarification was added to clarify when iSWM applies and when it doesn't. And what if the property was platted before iSWM was adopted by the municipality? And so this comment, is a clarification. So we don't recommend any changes to the technical manual or to the iSWM program. Legal nonconforming is a city decision. And so wherever this is an issue, you would need to contact the local city where the site is located. As far as the iSWM program goes, for new developments and redevelopments, iSWM does require discussion during the platting period, and the iSWM program would apply as long as they don't have local changes to the iSWM manual. And you can see table 1.1 from the criteria manual that states when is iSWM applicable and for which type of sites. Another concern that was brought up was if developers aren't familiar with the iSWM requirements and the associated costs to comply with the iSWM requirements, and then related to that developers and engineers just dealing with different local criteria adopted by all the different DFW communities and working in one city and then working in the other, and how the criteria might vary. And then the other comment was training on the iSWM manual, specifically for a storm drain pipe system. And so I think we recommend that the solutions to these concerns could be incorporating these topics into NCTCOG's training agenda. I think they're always looking for opportunities to incorporating needed training into their schedule. I also wanted to point out that there are existing trainings on the iSWM website that might be helpful regarding these topics. Specifically, there is a presentation from 2014 on the new iSWM implementation approach that just went over the changes that that went on during the iSWM program in 2014, and also another training opportunity right now on the iSWM website is rules of thumb for engineers and lessons learned. That's from April 2018, and it goes over hydrologic methods, water quality protection, acceptable downstream conditions. It goes over storm drain pipe systems and many other things. And you can listen to their recording and look at the PowerPoint presentation. And there's also an iSWM implementation training that goes over maintenance of it and inspection of BMPs from January 2018. And that's not all of the trainings that are included. There's several others that might be helpful. All right, so moving on to the Site Development Controls Technical Manual. So we have received, COG has been holding workshops and leading discussions on the Site Development Controls Manual in order to get feedback on that. And so there was a workshop held on October 9th of last year. And the website, or the PowerPoint, is on their website, as well as the workshop that was held on February 5th. And so those workshops were specifically just to receive feedback on the Site Development Controls Manual. And we have received lots of feedback, and we have summarized that into action items. And COG is working on implementing some of those recommendations discussed at those workshops. And so the Site Development Controls Manual is something being worked on underneath another task. But if you're interested in providing feedback, or seeing what are those updates that are going to go on, you can please feel free to reach out to our contact information at the end of the presentation, and also look at these workshops that went on and see what was discussed. And that moves us into the questions section portion of this presentation.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ashley, for going through that presentation for us. We did get one comment in the chat box, and it was in regards to the SCS hydrograph. It's from Howard, and he says the issue with this SCS hydrograph method may be conservative, but it results in an extremely large discharge for existing conditions, potentially causing issues for downstream owners, and especially in relation to smaller basin sizes. So Ashley and Ben, if you would like to unmute Howard, so if he has any additional comments to say, he can, and then you guys can go ahead and answer that comment for him. Oh, he says he doesn't have audio. Okay, never mind. But if you could speak to that, Ashley or Ben.
Hey, I'll jump in. This is Ben.
Go for it.
Okay. So yeah, Howard, I think you're right. I mean, that one's been debated for, it seems like for quite a few years on the SCS and rational, and obviously like that one that fits for both. I do believe, and this is just my personal opinion, that when you do get into those really small basins, especially at an inlet level, it is very difficult to do those with the SCS unit hydrograph, which is why I believe the rational is allowed for a lot of the smaller basins, inlet sizing, laterals, and things like that. For the downstream conditions, once it gets above a certain threshold, it does require a timing consideration. That is where it is obviously wanting to move towards a hydrograph method. And I think the SCS is probably one of the more appropriate, depending on what the conditions are. But is your thought that there's a better method out there as opposed to SCS, or is it just to acknowledge some of the concerns when you get to a really small basin?
I know he mentioned in the chat is that the result is the outfall size is larger than they see using the rational method.
And he also just said more just as an acknowledgement of the concern, and maybe a recommendation on minimum basin sizes for SCS method. Yeah,
we can do that. We'll put an action item to go back and review. I don't know off the top of my head, but I know pretty much all of those methods were developed with a specific range in mind. So we'll go back and review the basin size, basically if there's an appropriateness for which, it's not recommended below a certain size. We'll go to review that.
Okay, he also says, would it help if points of contact for the iSWM development review by cities were provided on the iSWM website? This list will change over time, so we'll need to decide on how often to update.
That's an interesting thought. I would defer to COG, you guys on that. Basically asking if the point of contact with each community, I didn't see the question. Yeah, points of contact for iSWM development reviews by city were provided on the iSWM website. Yeah, interesting thought. I would definitely defer to COG on that one.
Okay, he also says NCTCOG staff could send out annual emails for contact info to see if it stays updated. Sorry. And Ashley, could you unmute Carolyn and Edith,
yes.
if they have anything to say?
I'm sorry, I had a dog issue. What's the question?
Sorry, I have to pull it. So Howard said, would it help if points of contact for iSWM's development review by cities were provided on the iSWM website? This list will change over time, so it will need we'll need to decide on how often to update.
It's actually Ranjan making that comment, and so I unmuted him if you'd like to discuss.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
What we could do is update that at the same time that we update membership at the beginning of every fiscal year. But we could certainly add something like a contact list to, I don't know if we'd put it on the front page of the website, but we could certainly put it there where people can find it.
Okay, Tamara Cook, can you unmute her as well? Sorry. She says, I think we can accommodate this if the cities are okay with having their information posted on the website. So that's her response on that.
Yeah.
Okay. Tamara, Edith, did you, or specifically Tamara, did you have anything else to say?
No, that's it. I think it's just a question of if everyone feels okay with having their information posted, then I don't see that as a problem, as long as they give us permission to do that.
Okay. I guess that's something that we can discuss in the future, hopefully at the next iSWM meeting, whenever that gets rescheduled. Okay, so are there any other questions or comments? If you'd like to say something, you can type your name in the chat box and we'll unmute you. Okay. All right. Well, thank you everyone for taking time out of your day to join us. So as I said and Ashley said earlier, these recommendations will be summarized into a memorandum and submitted to the iSWM implementation subcommittee. We're hoping to have this to the subcommittee by April. So keep a lookout for that. But if you have any other questions or would like to contact us, our information is below. Ashley Lowry and myself, Sydney Liggins. And thank you again. Have a good day.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.